The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. Everything you think you know about evil is wrong. Okay. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's Wednesday, April 10th, 10:02 a.m. Mountain Time from my mountain retreat in the jungles of Costa Rica. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. And what I'm going to start doing now is just going through and talking through the fourth chapter of my last book, The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me. And because I think that a lot of the concepts in that book are very, very important, and a lot of the information in that book is quite important for people to be able to, in some measure anyways, comprehend. So we're going to begin with just a definition of the devil. For those of you who've read the book, this will be just sort of a commentary, if you will. I don't know how to describe these last three books I've written. They're not quite any genre, and just weirder than science fiction or fantasy, but all true. So that's it. So we have a concept of the devil, right? This concept was, I think, largely introduced by the Christian religion. And there's a lot of people in Christianity now who think they have a comprehension of the devil. I would say that they don't, but, and that's the thing. Everybody thinks they understand the devil, or they have a concept of the devil. And this would be very similar to the way people think that they have a concept of God. But the concept of something and the living experience of something are two completely different things. Knowledge and experience are synonyms, okay? Knowledge and experience are synonyms. So if you're a physicist and you're studying something like spooky action at a distance, you have a concept of what spooky action at a distance is, but not a whole lot of experience. You're seeing it through the filter of calculus and through formulae. You're not actually directly experiencing it. So spooky action at a distance is the ability of one person to affect something in a different locale. And in physics, the explanation is more technical, but it has to do with the way a message can be transferred from one atom to another in different parts of the universe. So it's this idea of there's a level of interconnectivity to everything that's going on down here. Something that spiritual teachers have been teaching us since the beginning of our recorded history. And even predating that, I'm sure a lot of the shaman figured it out as well, because a lot of the shamanic paths were highly, highly advanced. And meaning that they went far beyond even what we would call the astral plane. They understood time, they understood cycles, they understood ancestors, they understood incarnation, they understood everything. And all of this from a non-technical society, which is kind of remarkable when you think about it. And a little bit of a rebuke to the chauvinism and elitism of our manifestation culture. And we are the manifestation culture. We've materialized with the West. We've materialized more things on this planet than any other culture in this epoch of time that we're living through. Okay, that's all there is to it. Everything people have been told about the devil is, by and large, a complete crock of shit. It's absolute nonsense. And you can't really know it unless you go out and investigate it yourself. Now, the great mythos of the Abrahamic religions is the Luciferian fall. And this is a very strong concept in Christianity, and it's an extremely strong concept in Islam as well. Now, from my perspective, there was no fall. Okay, there is absolutely no fall. I mean, when you look at it from the perspective of the yugas in the Far East, there is and even the ages in the West, right? So Golden Age, Silver Age, so on and so forth. There is a dilapidation, if you will, of the environment we live in due to our participation and use of it, right? Which is basically the same thing as a car wearing down over years, right? Now, because the earth is animated by the eternal life force of the creator, the entropic principle is not really coming into focus the way we think of it in the metaphor of the car breaking down after years of use, you know, the metal rusting and all of these things. But if you keep swapping out parts, you can keep a car going forever. Now, the earth has a self-cleaning mechanism. Okay, it definitely has a physical, biological self-cleaning mechanism. However, it, to my understanding, it does not have a mechanism to clean itself on the astral. Okay, and this is why we get a lot of spirits hanging around the earth for, in some instances, up to thousands of years. There are some places on this planet where ghosts have been there for an almost uncountable number of years. I mean, they're countable. We're not getting into millions or anything like this, but, and this is and the accrual of information that is detrimental to us and the utility of practices that are detrimental to us, no matter how powerful they are, bring about the decline of the circumstance in which we live, the world in which we live. And I think specifically, dark arts are one of these things that can take out a society very, very quickly when a lot of people get into it. Now, the society may continue, but if there's too many people involved in these sorts of things, then what's going to happen is you're going to create a kind of a living hell, if you will. I mean, I would even go so far to say, you know, that, aside from the interference of foreign governments, which is one factor, one of the main causes for the state of Haiti right now is the intergenerational use of voodoo and black magic and blood magic. Okay. And so what happens over time is you literally create a kind of hellscape. You know, Haiti, if you've been following the news, I mean, Haiti is just unbelievably dark now. And Barbecue, the cannibal gang leader. So that's a very dark circumstance, a very dark possession, if you will. All right. So if the angels never fell and it's a bunch of nonsense, where do we go from there? And what was the intent of telling that? And it by the way, it's not just the Christians and the Muslims that believe that. That's also a very well-defined Kabbalistic concept, and they go into more depth in it in the Kabbalah. And they talk about the fall of an order of beings just below the creator. Yeah, and the Kabbalah suggests that we were originally created to be astral beings, and then our fall was the fall from the astral to the physical. Okay, this is the fall of man. Now, it may be that we fell from our understanding and our integration with the astral, which integration with the astral and physical makes for a much more pleasant life, by the way, because you've got, two dimensions fused into one, which in many ways are represented by the double helix in DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. You can look upon that as the tool to manifest a being that is physical and astral. So when I say astral, what do I mean? Well, in a very practical sense, what I am talking about is your imagination. Okay. So when you sit and you imagine something, that's an astral experience. When you dream, that's an astral experience. So the astral plane is defined as the sensory plane, or where we have what you would call feeling and sort of sensual contact with the world, a deep feeling and connection with the world. Now, there's life on the astral. There's all kinds of things living on the astral. It's a whole world and a whole cosmology, just like the physical. So I think the original state of man was a consciousness that could cohabitate the physical and the astral simultaneously and live a more rich life. And this connection with the astral has been broken. Okay. I mean, we all still have imagination, but when you talk to people, they're not aware of the fact that what's going on inside of them is real. And what's going on inside of you is in fact real. You know, so you can say, well, that's my imagination. I'm projecting that. Those are my desires. Well, if you look at your life, those desires are probably bleeding out into your physical existence, right? And so let's take the case where somebody gets broken. They get into an addictive cycle. Okay. Let's take crack cocaine, for example. It's an intense experience of the astral plane. It's almost like your consciousness from, I've never smoked crack, so I'm not speaking from experience here. And I do realize I'm contradicting the statement I made earlier where knowledge and experience are synonyms. So, and I'm not going to smoke crack to do a podcast and tell you what it's like. But there's a significant amount of crack in Central America. And it's very cheap. And so there's a lot of crackheads here. Okay. It's about, I think, $2 for a rock over here, you know, very, very cheap. So this is what people are looking at, and this is what they're doing. Okay. So I want you to ask yourself a question. What kind of a God would create a universe and have his initial creations rebel against him? Very interesting to contemplate. So, and I don't mean to sound blasphemous here, because I have no blasphemous intent toward my creator. I love my creator, but if that's the level of competence we're dealing with, what chance do we have? Okay, if our creator can't even create correctly, what chance do we have? And this is why, in many ways, it is a fictitious doctrine or a metaphor that has, let's just say at this point, gotten completely out of control. Okay. So the devil of our popular imagination is the devil who made up the story about the devil, right? A little bit of a Zen koan there, or a Wallace Stevens poem. The devil of our popular imagination is the devil who made up the story about the devil. There's a line by my favorite poet is Wallace Stevens, if I've never mentioned that. And yes, I went through a huge poetry phase in my 20s. And I know that sounds a bit fruity and everything, who reads poetry in the 21st century, but there's a lot to be gained from poetry. In the Western tradition, it was always an ancillary to our spiritual traditions, you know. So it's worth reading poetry, definitely worth reading poetry. And I think the most important poet of the 20th century in English was Wallace Stevens. And he died in 1956 and got the Nobel Prize in 1955. I'll try and see if I can recite a poem of his by memory. So let's try this one. It's called Another Weeping Woman. Pour the unhappiness out from your too bitter heart, which grieving will not sweeten. A poison grows in this dark, its black blooms rise. Imagination, the one reality in this imagined world, leaves you with him no fantasy moves, and you are pierced by a death. And the poem is about a woman at a funeral and what's going on in her consciousness. It's very fascinating, but he's got that line in there. Imagination is the one reality in this imagined world. And so he's suggesting that God works through the principle of imagination. So his dream becomes matter, and we're part of the object material dream of God. And we also have the godlike power to dream. But when we're in human form, it can often backfire on us and cause us incredible pain. Hence another weeping woman, the woman at the funeral. Pour the unhappiness out from your too bitter heart, which grieving will not sweeten. To the creation of the story of the devil was in many ways an attempt to explain some of the things that were going on this world. And And the devil does in fact exist, but it's not exactly what we think it is. Um, so we've been lied to, and we've been lied to by our religious leaders, but they're trying to control us, right? And why do human beings have to be controlled, by the way? You know, well, one of the reasons we have to be controlled is whether we realize it or not, we're incredibly powerful. Okay. And this is something that not a lot of people remind themselves of. A human being, each and every human being, is an incredibly powerful instrument of manifestation through our consciousness. Okay. Now, our abilities are profoundly dilapidated, and most people don't believe in their ability to manifest, but every single human being has it. Perhaps not every human being down to the last one, 100%, but that's a topic for another day, and there would be reasons that they've lost their ability to manifest, okay? So we've been told lies also because they're placeholders for us to live and experience a state of consciousness. And it's because the developing psyche can't handle the truth. And so the people who know, they obfuscate the truth in some measure through parable. So you could say that, well, there's no harm in that, right? It's actually the right thing to do when you think about it. And it's a general rule that carries through all of life. There's a class of human beings, I would say that they're the majority actually, who want to hear the lies their whole life. They don't want to hear the truth. The only time you can hear the truth, and when truth begins to be revealed to you, okay? So let's take the truth of the state of the world. The truth of the world, it's a very ugly truth, the state of this world. And so as an act of mercy, it's censored from us. We look at the world like horses on the road with blinders on. They put those blinders on so the cars coming up behind the horse don't spook it, okay? It's because it'll spook the horse when it's coming up behind them. That was the reason for the invention of horse blinders. And the horse blinders keep the horse's vision directly ahead and cut off the peripheral vision, okay? And very much this goes on with human beings as well, not necessarily related to our physical movement, but related to our psychic or an imaginative journey through this world and our understanding of what's going on. So the blinders are put on until they can be taken off, okay? And the blinders hold back the unbelievable level of negativity in human life. And it is really probably more negative than most people think, okay? And when you begin to attain what I would call, or what anybody would call, inner reality, when you're able to go to inner realities and you understand that you're living in a cosmology, as they say in the Bible, my father's mansion has many rooms. That's a reference to the multidimensionality of the creator, okay? And how each of these dimensions can be a living space or a room within the universe for a being to exist within. When you start to get that sort of knowledge into you, then you're capable of handling the truth of what's going on in the world, because you know it's not the whole truth. You know you're the product of a God or a creator that loves you unconditionally, and therefore more of the truth begins to come to you, okay? And then if this happens to you in a lifetime, and you're living among a population that hasn't grown their consciousness to the degree that you've grown yours, how do you convey the information? And because the information was given to you, and because we're a social and communicative creature, the human being, you have kind of an obligation to transfer the information to the rest of your tribe. So how do you do that without scaring them? Well, you create a parable, okay? You create a story. And people who begin an inner journey will get to a point where they can decode the parable, okay? Because every parable is encrypted. It's really even beyond encryption. There's layers upon layers upon layers to the stories in our Western scripture. And this gets into, the gematria, the number to the letter, and all kinds of codifications within the original Torah, which is not really even fully understood by the Jews. The Kabbalah is the attempt to decode the Torah. So how could they be given something they don't understand? Did Moses understand it? I don't know. So it was originally taken out of Egypt and part of their cosmology. And then the next question you ask yourself is, how could a society get to the level of advanced understanding that Egypt achieved, and it all goes away? Where did it go? Who took it away? How come that knowledge doesn't remain in the human race? It's taken away because we misuse it. So at the beginning of creation, we're given everything. We're given a connection with the divine. We're given divine powers as human beings. There's no fear of death. Life is much longer. It just goes on and on. And as we get into more and more an environment that is more laden with our own defective creations, both some defective imaginative creations, which exist in the astral as egregors, and defective material creations, like inventions that don't harmonize with this environment correctly, like fossil fuels. If you're going to believe all the carbon nonsense, I don't believe there's any such thing as global warming, but I do believe there's a necessity to consider our environment and the human being's impact upon it, definitely. So you get the truth when you're ready to handle the truth and not before, okay? So the teachers will obfuscate it when they put it into teachings, and it's actually the right thing to do, right? You'd be amazed what people will believe if you put a human being in a funny costume and give them a title, okay? And like it's really kind of amazing, okay? It's complicated. So you got to ask yourself, getting back to the devil, you have to ask yourself, how could our imagination create something that scares us, right? And if our imagination created it, then why would we be afraid of it? It's our creation, right? The fight or flight mechanism in human beings is only geared towards things that are real. It's a biological impulse. I don't think it was originally part of our construction. I think it was added on through malicious genetic engineering or an affectation of the dark karmic cycle we're in now. Okay. So what's the inward fear? It's the fear of the unknown, fundamentally. Who am I? How long do I have? What happens to me after it's all over? The Roy Batty questions from Blade Runner. That's simply, quite simply what it is. Okay. You can figure out almost everything you need to know about a human being by how they answer those three questions, the Roy Batty questions. Who am I? How long do I have? And what happens to me when it's all over? Okay? Those are the three questions that tell you everything you need to know about who you're dealing with when you're talking to a person. But not many people talk about these sorts of things, right? Maybe in monasteries or ashrams and things like this, the conversations would come up. But very few people are interested in engaging in the truth of what a human life is and what it was created for and what its real purpose is. We get distracted. We get distracted by our impulses, by our biology, by our desires. And then we create this false construct called the person, the ego, which then just starts sucking up all the energy, and it wants to realize itself. And in 99% of human beings, the ego gets to such a level that people think it's them. I mean, that is the state we're in now in the world. The ego is just a construction. The ego is to consciousness what a scab is to a cut on human skin. Okay, so the ego comes in to protect and shield us from the denser and more negative vibrations on the physical plane. And we need it as a psychic shield, as a psychic construct. But never, ever believe that it's you. You don't exist. Bruce McDonald doesn't exist. It's a construct. I've been given a name and a birth certificate just to fit into the society. and to meet the fiduciary and accounting responsibilities of the Treasury in the country you're born into. That's the main reason you're given a social identity. You know, that's the main reason right there. So if we're going to talk about the devil as being an individual consciousness, then we have to go to the plural, okay? The devil is many, the devil is most. Now, the truth is the devil is a field of energy, and that energy is the lie, the comfort of that lie, and the comfort of all the lies we tell, okay? And everybody does this. You ever ask yourself, why do people lie? And especially, why do they lie to themselves? Okay? I always go back to classicism to make my points, okay? Lady Macbeth, perpetually at the water bowl trying to rub blood off her hands that isn't there, okay? Isn't there. It's the perfect description of madness and something that we've lost in the modern world. In the modern world, we define mental illness as a chemical imbalance or a physical thing that happens in the brain. That's a lie. Psychiatry is, well, I mean, it's part of the web of deceit that's been around us for about 120 years now. Okay, so if you look at the 20th century, and going back to my book, The Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me, when you get past this chapter, the next chapter is all about the 20th century and how all of this density of consciousness and this murder of the imagination came about. And we've given up our imagination and we're more enthralled with the materialization of the 21st century. The computers, the technology, the cell phones, all of these sorts of things. Very few people want to live quietly in nature anymore until the land. Everybody wants to live without working or to live in some function or duty that has little or no meaning but gives them some form of title. Human beings are profoundly corruptible, but it's not always a moral failure. You can get to a point in a society where the basic social conditioning is so negative, it would be better if the society ended, okay? And we're almost there now. Now, to a lot of you who might be listening to me, you might think I sound like some kind of Luddite from 5 centuries ago, like some crazy religious person. Okay, what are you talking about, Bruce? Look at our medicine. Look at the longevity of life. Look at all the things we've done. Yeah, look at all the things we've done. But nature also regulated the basic capabilities of the human population, okay, and the ability to reproduce. Okay, so nature would stop things at its natural cycle so there wouldn't be overpopulation and things like this. Yes, allopathic medicine has extended life, but it has now put the burden of depopulating on governments. Do you understand? I'm going to say something now that I think a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways, okay? And not hate me, but what it's going to do is it's going to shatter sentimental constructs in people's consciousness, like a piece of ceramic being hit by a hammer, okay? If you come from a group of people that, let's say, has a rate of population attrition that is regulated by a certain deficiency in the population, so people habitually die. Let's say that infant mortality is high. So infant mortality is when children die in childbirth. Okay. If a third party, ergo another society, comes in and begins interacting with you, shares their medicine with you, and you go from a population, let's say in the Brazilian rainforest, or let's say an African country, you go from a population that hypothetically that's 1 million people in 1900, okay? And that you can't really get much beyond that million people because you haven't learned how to grow food, you haven't learned how to heal disease, and these sorts of things. So the breeding in the population stays at this relatively fixed number, 1,000 people. And this has been going on for a long time. And it's the balance you strike with your environment and its ability to sustain life. And most importantly, nature's ability to ensure that the human presence doesn't upset the balance. Another human population comes in, gives you antibiotics, and teaches you medical techniques that can save a lot of lives in childbirth, okay? And so your infant mortality goes down, your ability to grow food gets better, and everything changes, okay? Everything changes. You then you go from 1 million to 8 million in 100 years, which is basically 3 generations. If we look at one generation as 33.3 years, okay? And that's generally the length of a generation. It's 33 years, okay? Now, when that population gets to that point, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to go to war, and you're going to have to raid another tribe to feed your people, because you haven't learned to feed your people, because nature kept you regulated through its mechanisms: predation by wild animals, starvation and infirmity and child mortality. Through those things, your population was kept at its regulated number, okay? Third party comes in, your lifespan increases 8 times, or your population increases 8 times in 3 generations. You go from 1 million people to 8 million people. By the way, I'm indirectly telling you the story of the world. There were about 1 billion people in 1900, and in 2024, there's 8 billion people, largely due to the medical advancements from 1900 onwards. Penicillin, antibiotics, all of these sorts of things. Now, if the anonymous, faceless truth of nature was regulating the population and it was doing its job, what happens when the population becomes unregulated and the ecosystem becomes imbalanced? Whose responsibility is it to depopulate that population? See, people don't ask themselves the hard questions, you know? They don't look at the circumstance and see the spiritual reality of it. Okay? If you become a devout yogi, okay, and you become fully illuminated in the Ayurvedic traditions, many of these yogis can extend life almost indefinitely. There are stories of some of these yogis living to 500, 1,000 years in the Himalaya mountains. I'm not making this up, folks. And I'm not speaking from the perspective of a believer, like somebody telling you the Bible and, Noah's Ark really happened and literalizing mythology. And although Noah's Ark probably did happen, but that's another story. You know what I'm trying to say, right? I'm not doing that. I'm speaking literally. Okay, so what has the yogi done? The yogi has attained a state of consciousness where he has mastery over his body. He doesn't get sick. His cells don't age the way the rest of our cells age. He needs about 1/100th of the caloric intake that a normal human being needs. Okay, so then he doesn't have to forage for food or attack other villages to maintain his appetites. He's not procreating, so he's not replicating himself. The yogis are celibate, okay? So that's an example of somebody who deserves a 300-year life. He did it naturally and he did it spiritually. He can sustain his existence, and through the exploration of the supernatural, he is allowed to live a supernatural life. When technology comes in and displaces itself into populations and they get an extended life, they haven't earned it. They don't have the internal state to occupy a 300-year life. Their internal state is still an 80-year life. Okay, so what's going to happen when you give this longevity technology to people is they're going to go a little bit crazy. They're going to wipe themselves out. They're going to go nuts. Okay? So when people say to me that, oh, the government's going to depopulate us, I say to them, well, why do you think they have to do that? I don't actually have these conversations with people. I'd get punched in the face. Okay. But I can do them on YouTube because there's nobody here to punch me in the face. So you have to earn what you want in life. If you keep taking gifts like the gifts of technology that we've brought about in the last 120 years, what eventually happens is you become the de facto slave of the person who gave you the technology, because they're the only ones that allowed you to live this long. Now, if there's a consequence to elongated life through technology, then the people who created the methodology by which life could be extended, they become the de facto caretakers of the problem. Ergo, they then assume the karmic right to depopulate. You understand? Now, if you're living peacefully in the Amazon rainforest in complete harmony with nature, and everybody in your tribe lives to be at about 100 years old, and that you live off your land, you live off the fish in the rivers, and you don't overfish, and everything is in balance, then you're just going to keep going. And you see that, right? You see that in the Aboriginal cultures. The Quebecer culture I live with here in the Talamanca Mountains has been living the same way for about 10,000 years. What's the longest recorded history of any civilization that we've documented in Western history? You know, how long did the Egyptian civilization go? It wasn't 10,000 years. How long did the British Empire go? A few hundred years. How long did the American Empire go? About 80 years from World War II. Okay. And you see how the cycles are contracting, the cycles of empire are contracting, but they always fall apart. And they fall apart because they don't follow natural law. Okay. And we're in one of these major cycles now. And what's even more alarming is that we push this technology out to the second and third world as well. So if you live in the second and third world, and you come from a population that now has a lifespan like everybody else, you're living to 75, 85, 95 years old, not due to any new consciousness acquired in your tribe, but because you've taken the technology from another society. That society that gave you the technology has a say in what you end up doing to the planet because they're responsible for the extended life. Do you understand? It's a vast interlinked web, this world we live in and this life we live in. And not many people really understand it from that perspective. I digress. I go on these wild tangents. I'm trying to work off my text and explain the devil, but I am indirectly explaining the devil. So the devil, in many ways, the devil is an unpleasant truth. Okay. Well, what's depopulating the world? If you talk to the Christians now, well, the devil's loose. The world's being depopulated. It's all the devil, the devil, the devil, the devil. Is it? No, it's the devil of their imagination because they can't understand the truth of what's going on in this world. That's the problem. Okay. There's no such thing as death. We come in and out of these bodies all the time. Anybody listening to me now has probably had at least 1,000 incarnations. Okay? It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. We come and we go, we come and we go. We're looking to master this environment. Okay? Now, in the golden age, lifespan was much longer. That we really did have the old biblical lives of like centuries long and stuff. Adam lived a very, very long time. And in even further back than that, we go very, 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 very long. And it's not just the Western scriptures that capture this. They're captured everywhere if you read scripture as a hobby, as I do. So, for example, um, the Buddha gives a very detailed sutra on the ages. Okay, so the golden age, a human being lives X number of years, and it was very often well over 1,000 years, like several thousand years in the golden age, which would have been who knows how long ago. I don't really know the math and the ages. And then, according to the sutras of the Buddha, in the darkest age, okay, human life is 10 years. So what happens in dark times? How is the human race punished for its behavior? Or how does this living environment, this spiritually alive, interactive environment called physical natural reality on this planet operating with us. Okay? Well, in the darker ages, according to the Buddha, the lifespan of a human being will be 10 years, and women will become fertile at 5 years old. Okay, and that's as bad as it gets before everything is wiped out and the cycle is destroyed and we go back to a new golden age. So I don't think we're in the end now. I think this is a false end, as it's written in the Apocryphon of John and the end times of various Abrahamic religions. I think it's a psyop. I think we're a ways away from the full conclusion of the darkness, but there's something going on now that is creeping in between the cracks of the yugas. It's, if you will, a direct intervention of the Creator, because things went a little wonky here down on Earth, okay? Especially in this last cycle we've been in since the Enlightenment, in the 1600s, what we unfortunately call, in a gross misappropriation of language, we call the advent of reason, objectivity, science, and technology in the West the Enlightenment. In its true definition and in the original utility of the word enlightenment as it pertains to consciousness alone, as used by Hinduism and Buddhism, enlightenment has nothing to do with the mind. In fact, it's the transcendence of the mind. Okay? Now, in the Western definition, it's the literal and diametric opposite. So we've become the devil of the true spiritual teachings. Do you understand? We don't even tell people what enlightenment is anymore. We don't even know what it is in our society anymore. We don't even recognize it exists. We're celebrating radical atheists like Richard Dawkins, who are telling people that consciousness is a byproduct of biology, and when the body dies, you cease to exist in its entirety, which is completely ridiculous. You know, I mean, the overwhelming evidence on this planet is that life exists outside the body, whether it be the spooky shows on TV like Ghost Hunters, or all the scripture, or all the sages, saints, teachers, and prophets we've received who've told us the opposite. Okay? And for those of us who practice and experience, it's the opposite. But I can't translate that knowledge to you in the modality of our time, which is scientific and proven, because the nature of spiritual reality is each individual must prove it to themselves, because each soul must ascend back to the Creator on its own, in its own time. So I can't prove what I'm saying to you. The scientists, the materialists, the people giving you the cell phones, the antibiotics, the vaccines, they can prove what they're saying to you. Okay? So who are you going to believe? Bruce McDonald doing a podcast, or the American Academy of Sciences? I don't blame you for believing them. I don't blame you at all. I think people who believe things are retarded. You always have to have faith to keep going in your life. You have to believe there's meaning and purpose in your life. But you should never, as a general rule, believe anything. You should always seek experience. So if you want to know that life continues out of the body, the experience you're seeking is to go out of the body. This can be done meditatively. This can be done yogically. This can be done ritualistically. This can happen incidentally, as it does to these people who have near-death experiences, as documented by a couple of great YouTube channels that you might want to peruse sometime. One's called Next Level Soul Podcast, and the other one's called Shaman Oaks. And the two of them just pretty much interview people who've had near-death experiences. Now, again, you haven't had that experience, so why should you believe it? Well, you shouldn't. But something should awaken in you to pursue, with a little bit of discipline, the manifestation of that experience for yourself. Because don't you want to know? I mean, when you think about how important that one fundamental question is, does consciousness exist out of the body? Does it come into the body and have a human life and leave the body after the body is done and continue on? Or is it the product of biology? Well, I think that's a pretty important question for people to answer. Okay? People aren't interested. They'd rather learn React JavaScript and become a front-end developer. They, they'd rather create an app and become a millionaire, you know. And this is the age we're living in now, which is, by the way, the age of the devil. The devil is the lie. Nobody knows how it started. Okay. And everything goes completely and utterly off track and cannot be recuperated. Well, so you'd be amazed what people believe when somebody puts on a funny uniform and a funny hat, whether it be the yarmulke or the fish hat of the Pope and all of these sorts of things, right? You put somebody up in this ritual costume and they tell the population something, and the population believes it. But you should never believe anything. You should know things. Never believe anything. So if, again, to repeat myself, if we're going to talk about a devil as a being, as an individual consciousness, then we have to go to the plural. The devil is most. Okay? The devil is most things. Now, here's the truth from the perspective of Scripture. Okay? The truth. The devil is a divine being. Okay? It can be no other way. The devil is a divine being. He works with the law. The law. Okay? Like all higher order beings, the devil is best understood as energy. So remember I told what we were talking about just a little bit earlier. I give the example of a population that is given medicine, and their population goes from 1 million to 8 million. But they don't know how to live anymore. The old ways of their living don't work anymore. They can't, they don't advance their farming. They don't advance their society in accord with the increased life in the population. They don't change. They still live the way they lived when they were 1 million, but now they're 8 million, and they're 8 million because they received antibiotics and penicillin and a bunch of medical technologies that reduced infant mortality. So what do? Well, they go out and, because they're still afraid of death, because they haven't spiritually grown, when they are threatened, they're going to lose food and enter a famine or something because they can't control their population. What do? They go and attack a neighboring tribe. What does the neighboring tribe call them? The devil. The devil. These devils attacked us. We did nothing to them. We were planting our maize and our yucca and our pumpkin and squash, and we had our system down. And these people who got the foreign devil's medicine and overpopulated attacked us and stole our food because they lost their harmony. The devil, the devil, the devil, the devil. So this is what the devil is. The devil is that part of reality that has to happen that we don't want to acknowledge because it breaks our bubble of what reality is. Okay? So, like all higher order beings, the devil's best understood as energy. Very difficult to fit him into a body, to make him like us, to anthropomorphize him, right? Human beings, we have to anthropomorphize it. Now, a lot of the gods are like us, but those are astral beings that came here and seeded physical populations, okay? Or interacted with physical populations. So they came at a higher plane of existence and materialized into physical matter. So this would be the story of the Greek gods. This would be the story of the Norse gods. This would be the story of the Celtic gods. Anywhere you see a pantheon of gods, like the Tuatha De Danann, like Zeus in the pantheon. Now, what do we do in the modern age? We say that this is the way we mapped our consciousness before we had psychiatry, psychology, and MRIs. That these gods represent certain aspects of our psyche and these sorts of things. Well, number one, that is true. They do represent certain aspects of our psyche, okay? But remember, our psyches go out of our body. Our psyches go into the psychic planes, which are non-physical, okay? And then above the psychic planes are the spiritual planes of existence, okay? So the people who mythologize it, like the tenured professors in English departments now, okay, the people who come in and destroy the literalness of it and corrupt what imagination is, tell you, well, these beings were invented to represent certain things and they helped the Greek people grow. Okay? No, they literally were here. They literally came here and they were literally here. Okay? And this is the part we've got all wrong in what I call the age of reason. It's very important to understand the role of imagination in a human life, because if you lose the connection with the reality of imagination, you're going to end up living in lies because you're not going to know what's true. And this is what's happened. And all of our higher consciousness has sort of collapsed now. Now we've got technology, we've got the physics, we've got the fusion, the fission, we split the atom. What good has any of that done us? We now live in terror all the time of nuclear annihilation, and we say we won World War II. We celebrate it with a movie like Oppenheimer. It would have been better to fight the Japanese with swords to the last man than to bring nuclear weapons into this space. Because the number one goal is the continuity of the species on the planet. You see, man has the ability to destroy itself. This is one of the liabilities of sentience. Bears will never destroy themselves. They may go out of the creative process because the life form no longer suits the biosphere, and the creative forces that are behind evolution create new life forms. Okay? So they may go, but they'll never do themselves in. Nothing in nature that knows its place and has a diminished level of self-awareness compared to a human being and no ego will ever destroy itself because it lives naturally. Human beings have the capability of destroying themselves. It's a sad but true reality. So that's the Talamanca review for today. I am Bruce McDonald. If you want to get more into some of the things that I'm talking about today, go to Amazon and get a copy of The Devil and Us, a memoir of you and me, Bruce McDonald, MacDonald. And we'll continue tomorrow with The Devil Part 2.